about managing change and how to integrate sustainability into asset management, and I would say also capital planning. So very quickly, here is the City of Vancouver's Greenest City Action Plan, and I show it I'm going to refer back to it further on in my presentation, but also to say that we have an action plan, and it's very handy in a way that it organizes our priorities with respect to sustainability, but can also be used to guide other pieces of work or to support other pieces of work, such as capital planning and asset management. So our Greenest City Action Plan has 3 high-level objectives: zero carbon, zero waste, and healthy ecosystems. And within that triad are 10 goal areas, which are shown by the horizontal and vertical planks. So at the City of Vancouver and in the region, the Lower Mainland in British Columbia, we understand that there are changes in our climate that are coming over the next 50 to 100 years, and that's predominantly an increased amount of rainfall in the fall, less rain in the summer, as we've seen. Sea level rise currently, we're expecting 1 meter by 2100 and 2 meters by 2200, and we understand that with new science and new understanding of how everything plays together in the Arctic and Antarctic, that we could see much higher levels of sea level rise. And we also have heat issues here, which I know sounds kind of funny on the West Coast, but we're not used to the hot weather that is experienced in say, central Canada. Now that information, and I'm kind of setting up, I'm going into the traditional sustainability discussion, but because all of this work was really useful in getting us to where we are today. And that information came from a series of downscaled global climate models, care of the Pacific Climate Impact Consortium in Victoria. And they've been very handy and valuable to get us that data to make decisions and to do further modeling, because those climate changes create impacts that affect people. And predominantly in Vancouver, we're seeing those impacts with flooding and drainage, agricultural urban forest damage, and subsequently biodiversity loss, road damage, and extreme heat, again, in the summer times, especially with our vulnerable populations in the city. So in 2012, the City of Vancouver created and adopted an adaptation strategy, and it has 9 priority actions with 46 supporting actions, and it falls into kind of your usual suspects: coastal flood risk assessment, so that's sea level rise, drainage, that's our stormwater management plan, which has recently been rebranded and adopted as the Rain City Strategy, and I highly recommend checking it out. And then some other items related to urban forestry and resilience planning to ensure that we have backup powers. And you can see that these are very asset-heavy plans and priorities, and they talk about really levels of service that we have to provide for our citizens and our businesses within the city. So I know when I came onto this subject area of asset management and capital planning, I just thought of it, I kind of thought of it as in terms of widgets and assets, those type of things, but really it's about levels of service here. So fast forward to the LAMP program and Vancouver's journey into asset management and levels of service and sustainability, this theme of change. So the climate is changing, but so are our assets and our levels of service, and that's because we are changing, demographics are changing. And over time, we're going to have to refurbish our old assets, renew them, they're going to have to reflect these new normals that are coming at us in the future, and they will have to be flexible to serve different populations at different stages of their lives. So my work here at the city as an adaptation planner is focusing a lot at the high level. And so this is an example of, in my mind, of how to integrate sustainability in asset management, but at a facility level, so at a park. This is a picture of Jericho Park. It's right on the water. It's a historic Air Force base, and now has a really great community amenity, the Jericho Sailing Center, as well as it's a huge area for recreation. It's also one of the most sacred historic sites for the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh. And so in the future, with sea level rise, it's going to have to be adapted to provide a range of services for a range of users. And on the right hand of the screen is this picture of this cartoon of what it could look like in the future, with some retreat in there, with some room for ecosystem services, and then like with groins to retain that recreational piece for sunbathers. And that's just an idea. It's not. We're still working on some of our work there. And again, we're not alone in this future thinking about refurbishing our assets with climate change in mind. New York City, through the Rebuild by Design program, looked at their Battery Park after Superstorm Sandy, and are planning for major infrastructure upgrades that will perform under future sea level rise, future hurricanes, and other storms. And really this design with nature and multi-purpose space theme is pretty predominant. So coming from that little section, what I see is really useful and advantageous for sustainability folks like you and I is that we need to bring together our land use planners and their processes with the asset managers, those folks in engineering and what have you, to really talk about how we design our communities, how to manage greenfield development and sprawl, because really that's more expensive and it's asset heavy, and it could be setting us up for huge costs in the future. And how we need to ground truth each other's work through this lens of sustainability, asset management, and capital planning. So when I started with the LAMP Vancouver team, I was like, okay, this is my first go at it. Where do I start? What type of information do I need? How do I prioritize work, and just where do we go? So started with looking at our climate information, our sustainability policy, and my colleagues' work in capital planning and asset management. That's where, again, looking at our Greenest City Action Plan, that is our driver at the city. And I created a sustainability crosswalk, which I'll show next, and then conducted some interviews with staff to understand their priorities and their needs and the timelines that their work runs by. Oh, sorry, went ahead. So this is my sustainability crosswalk. And forgive the Tetris, like, look at it. I'm a child of the 90s. I really enjoyed Tetris back in the day. So what I did is I took the 10 goal areas of our Greenest City Action Plan and I crossed them with our spending area in our capital budget. So we at the City of Vancouver look at asset management through the lens of long-term capital planning, but also asset management, because both one informs the other. It's a circular process, like Kim is saying. All of this is really systems thinking, and that's the challenge, I think, for us as people, as practitioners, to get through. But I wanted to know where the overlap was with our sustainability goals and our spending area, and I just did this at a, look from my point of view, and then I took this information and I ground truthed it with my colleagues in engineering and planning. So we have columns like the heavy green with the 3 dots are like direct infrastructure and planning synergies. Affordable housing can be a great vehicle for our passive house standards, and things like zero waste really fits in well with housing. Let me see, where were some of my favorites? Lighter footprint, that's sustainable lifestyle, so that's kind of more of a high-level one. But access to nature, like that has a really great connection with parks and open spaces, and also our green infrastructure plan. So I just wanted to, I needed to, we talk about all this stuff in theory, but I needed to get down to practice and find out where the synergies were and where we could start doing some good work. So a specific asset and a good example of one where you can integrate sustainability and traditional asset management and capital planning is Municipal Plate. It's a great entry point for everyone. There's the Fraser Basin Council's E3 fleet programming, which anyone can enter into. We at the city, we have an emission target. We have other targets of procuring electric vehicles by a certain time. And it's a really nice, tight project area for folks to work in and to start to explore some of these themes and practices in terms of asset management and sustainability. Another example of sustainability and asset management and capital planning at the city are facilities. So we have, through our Green City Action Plan, a target to reduce emissions in our corporate facilities, and that set the table for an energy planner in that group to, first inventory and then figure out what our service levels are and in terms of facilities, but also partnerships. We really rely on a lot of partnerships at the City of Vancouver to deliver services to our citizens. And then we could tag all that information with our targets and drill down to metrics like greenhouse gases per meter squared, LEED ratings, and again, the passive house standards. So someone brought up, or there was a question about natural assets, and I'm really glad to hear that. I think that's an emerging topic, and Gibson's and the Municipal Natural Assets Initiative with Roy Brooks and Michelle Molnar from the David Suzuki Foundation are really doing amazing work in this field. But basically with natural assets, it's like, it can be things like, your ditches, your streams, your shorelines, your trees. I think a first step is how do you, just to inventory those assets and then look at their conditions. Like Kim brought a very good example with the pine trees in Victoria. Our urban, those urban foresters probably expected to pay for renewal of their trees every 70 to 80 years. Now they're going to have to ratchet that up to every 40 to 50 years, and that will affect their bottom line. A simple costing with natural assets can be, what would it cost if the asset was replaced by an engineered solution, so a wetland. If you bulldozed on a wetland and you replaced it with gray infrastructure, what's the cost there? And cost includes O&M, operations and maintenance. So here's an example, because when I talk to people, they're like, okay, well, how do we measure this? How do we value sustainability in terms of the traditional asset management classes? And so here's just a list for civic facilities, carbon reduction, emissions, equity, a resilient social system, cooling, streetscapes, which I think is another interesting emerging area, is carbon reduction, waste reduction, healthy ecosystems. Again, can be a vehicle for your urban forest targets, your green infrastructure targets, coastal and river drainage protection, kilometers of dike or other coastal infrastructure management. Oh, I see my timer's going off. And then the rest, you see the rest. Okay, I'll just be. So models for action, these are examples of how you can actually move your work forward. So your land use and regional plans, your community and corporate sustainability plans like our our GCAP program, mentioned Fraser Basin Council's E3 Fleet program, or you can work on themes if that's what works for your organization. And this is just a quick list of data sources going back up to that climate, the PCIC, the Pacific Climate Impact Consortium. Here are some other sources for climate information. NRCan has some great stuff. Oranos in Quebec has some really great work there. For the prairie folks, the park group, I'm not sure how active they are, but they have some information from 2009. For neighborhood scale information on adaptation, like check out the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction and the Intact Center on Climate Adaptation. And then for those who are local in the Metro Vancouver region, Metro Van did a nice work on 2016 climate impact data for the Lower Mainland. It's really, really good and fresh data. And again, just to wrap up, just that I think so much of this work really depends on sustainability practitioners and vice versa communicating to their colleagues and finding those intersections of our work with our colleagues in planning and engineering. We're pretty used to going out there and disrupting folks' work with help, with support, and I think that capital planning and asset management is a good theme to do our work through. The future is going to include new normals, and really for this work, I think you just need to pick like a project to start with, and then you can go from there. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Angela. So we have a couple of questions that have come in via the chat. One is, how do you see this approach being applied in a rural, remote community with limited planning capacity? I don't know if you have the more rural context or if you have spoken with colleagues who are from that context. But
yeah, no, that's a good question. I have worked in a smaller community before, and through LAMP there was some great work done by Airdrie and was it Smithers? I'll have to go back to that. It was in the Kootenays. Anyways, I think it's up to again yourself and your coworkers. Like, what works for you in terms of an asset class that needs work, that is going to get support from your council. That's really important. So that's why I bring up fleet a lot, because we all need vehicles, especially in the rural communities, and how can you right-size your fleet? There's a lot of space in fleet management for sustainability. And then, I mean, Prince George has got a lot of good examples of integrating asset management and sustainability, so I would also check them out too. But like for rural communities, yeah, it's like connect with your emergency management, or I know usually it's one person, but like your emergency management planning, asset management work, capital planning, and sustainability is a nice tie.
Great. Thanks for those reflections, and thanks for everyone who's submitting some comments. I see Alex has transferred a few to me. Someone had asked about what were the biggest internal challenges at the implementation stage. And I guess you're essentially still in the implementation stage, but have you encountered specific challenges, or how have you overcome some of those internal challenges?
Right. I think for the city, like, it's big, at least in my perspective. I know there's way bigger cities than us. it's about priorities and capacity. So again, it's the same as the question about, you know, rural communities and capacities. And so we had to pick something that had a clear kind of beginning and end, and we already had an understanding kind of what the output could be, so that we could test our way through a methodology, learn from it, and then replicate it elsewhere. So I think, again, so we started with facilities because the target was super straightforward, 33% reduction. There were good models out there, you know, to start with, and we were able to train up our staff internally and get some support from, I think at the time, BC Hydro and probably FCM for the position of an energy manager in our facilities group, and those were that's how we got through that first set of barriers.
Great. So starting in bite-sized pieces, essentially.
Yeah, starting with something that's manageable, both conceptually, but also work-wise.
Great. And there is another question about what about the water management in Vancouver, environment and climate change adaptations? So I think it's generally a question about how Vancouver manages water and sewer in relation to climate change. If whoever asked that question could maybe type it again with a bit more specific question, then we can try and answer that one.
Right.
There was also, I don't know if you had any.
Well, I mean, I guess I can talk a little bit about that in the sense that, so there's water conservation. So we're looking at that with, you know, like a lot of municipalities, any new residential buildings, like commercial and industrial are metered, residential new buildings are going to be metered. If you want to retrofit your home, you can. There is a challenge with the cheap price of water versus the infrastructure, but we know we need to adapt because we'll have 60 days without rain in the summer, which is significant. And we also draw from a Metro Vancouver drinking utility, so our reservoir is up in the mountains, and we're going to reach parity in Metro Vancouver by 2030. So the 2030, 35 about that. So the demographics point towards that time that our consumption will be just the same as what's available up there in the mountains. So we're looking at investing in green infrastructure a lot to recover and reuse our stormwater, and that's going to take some advocacy with working with the province to look at our health bylaw and how we can permit, say, the reuse of gray water in our toilets. And there should be benefits there to the environment in terms of the more water you can infiltrate and attenuate, then the less contaminated stormwater. We also have a CSO, combined sewer overflow network, like a lot of older cities, where we will be separated, aim to be separated by 2050, and so we're working on that. And that's yeah, water.
Yeah, that's great. There was actually one complimentary question that we can fit in maybe before we go to the next speaker, which was about how, can you briefly go over the operations and maintenance of rebuilding wetlands? So is that something?
So, I mean, that's a sticky question. It's a good question. Depending on your system, it's always going to be different. Each system is going to have its own unique O&M, and I don't have any numbers right in front of me. But I mean, typically, these reconstructed wetlands need weeding for the first 5 years, and then also for establishment, and then regular pruning. They need to have the invert so the bottom of their of the wetland of the water course needs to be cleaned out probably, it depends on the load, but it can be, yeah, everywhere from 1 in 5 to 1 in 10. Some, if they're really big, 1 in 20. And also, like in Vancouver, we have a small constructed wetland called Hinge Park. It has now become home to some very charismatic beavers who have their own Instagram posts or Instagram channel, which is very exciting. But they have also had to make us reflect on our operations and maintenance investment there because they're eating the trees. So it's a complex one. And yeah, I think that would be something for a more in-depth conversation, but something you have to plan for when you're costing out this asset.
Mm-hmm. So thinking about both the full life cycle of the assets and
yeah, and also then the indirect benefits. Like that beaver at Olympic Village has been a huge plus for the community in terms of connecting them to nature and getting people to invest in that type of infrastructure or park structure. Like people are now like that stuff, and that's great to me because it provides habitat for pollinators and birds, which is really important in Vancouver.
Mm-hmm.